All right, I'm here with Tom.
Hello.
I'm not gonna sing the theme song this morning.
Good.
Mostly just because it's way earlier than we did this last time, and I'm not quite
Yeah,
as caffeinated. This
this is my time.
this is your like free time in the morning.
Six to 8 a.m. is when I actually
Mm.
get things done.
Yeah, yeah. I'm usually a 5:30, 5 a.m. guy, but
Five,
I
my brain's too cloudy.
yeah, I could not get out of bed. There's some days where I just can't get out of bed, and today I just kept rolling back over. Like, you know what? It's not happening. Um, Yeah, so I don't know. I'm a little foggy. So we'll see how much I actually have to share with people today because I'm see
That's
how
okay.
coherent I am. All right, so let's get started, Tom. What you working on?
I am working on a for my own writing. I'm working on a thriller, which is something did about 20,000 words of last about a year ago, and then set aside just because it was one of those things where you wake up and you have an idea and you're like, oh, and then you just like spend a few days on it and you're like,
Yeah,
okay, this is fun, but I'm actually had already started other things that need to be finished first. So
yeah.
I just published book 5 in sort of lighthearted crime caper series that I wrote the first draft of during Nano,
Nice.
um, with you and Mary and who else was turning up most days.
Was it
Anyway, it
Shane?
was last
These are
fall.
all people in the dialogue document.
Yeah, it wasn't.
Um,
It wasn't Shane.
it wasn't Shane.
Yeah, maybe Shane did a bit. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But
Let's not give him credit for anything.
we all did. We were all like, let's do NaNoWriMo with
Yeah,
support group.
it was super
And it was
helpful.
great. It was very helpful. And so I got that rewritten and polished up and put out. And
Nice.
I am messing around with changing covers once again and putting on covers that I hate
Nice.
because
Excellent.
they are more genre appropriate.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Because I keep coming up with covers and being like, I love this cover, and
yeah,
then put it out there and realize it's still not the genre.
yeah.
So that is what
I
it
don't know.
is.
Your mid-journey covers are really cool.
Um, they're really fun, and I just made a super awesome one. And my friend and coworker Elliot was like, "That is utterly amazing. It's still not what you said you were going to make."
That is beautiful,
I
but
know.
it
I
has
was like,
nothing to
I
do.
know, but I'm going to use it for something else.
Yeah.
The uh anyway, I want a drawing to have Laura do an edit, which was great because I've worked with you on things before, but I hadn't
Yeah.
worked with Laura on things. And as I've mentioned before, she is just an ace at character, which probably
Hmm.
comes from her years of doing her job.
2 decades. Yeah. Two
Um,
decades of building characters for simulations.
and this was particularly useful because the story I'm working on has alternating chapters with alternating first person narratives.
Nice.
So though just two people that go back and forth, but those voices have to be
Yeah.
utterly distinct.
Hmm.
And uh, and I really thought I was doing a good job. I mean, I was doing a good job, but what Laura showed me was that I could do a much better job. And
Yeah.
the reason I'm so grateful and excited about it was that um, I had been like I wrote a book called Write Your Novel, which is aimed at
Hmm.
first time novelists
A
getting it
really,
done.
really excellent
So
book.
I had been I had been really delving deep into all the really fun stuff, right? Structure and
Hmm.
character building, all that sort of stuff. And then for this last book for Nano, I said I'm going to throw all that out the window and pants, and I had a great time. I had a really great
Nice.
time. Those books have short chapters anyway, and so my thought process was I'm just gonna leave every chapter in a way that I know exactly what has to
Mm.
happen in the next chapter, and it's just click, 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 click down the road. It was really fun.
Nice.
But now with this one, I want to, and I've learned so much studying writing and structure and such in the last 2 years that I wanted to put it into practice. But there was no point in putting it into practice in book 5 in a series because if people liked books 1 through 4 enough, they're
Yeah.
gonna like. I don't need a huge jump to book
Yeah.
5.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if you ever read uh, Robert Grace, the Elvis Cole novels.
Yes, I have read an Elvis School
Monkey's
novel. Yeah.
Monkey's Raincoat.
Yep.
They're fabulous.
Yeah,
The
they're great.
first four are exactly the same. They're like 200 pages.
Hmm.
They're super tight. They're funny. Then he writes L.A. Requiem, not L.A. Confidential, but a book
Yeah.
called
I
L.A.
haven't I
Requiem.
haven't read LA Requiem. But yeah.
It is 10x.
Really?
It's 400 pages. It's way better done. It's
Wow.
fabulous. And which is great, but nobody who is reading the series needed that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. So, and I feel the same. I feel like if I'm going to put in that effort to get up to the next level, I'm going to do it outside of that series. And so this is a standalone.
Nice.
Um, and and to have Laura look at it and say, yes, your voices are strong. I like what you're doing with your voices, but you haven't you haven't been 100% with them in each and every paragraph,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
You can't be sloppy. You got to
Yeah.
go back through and say, and she's like, there's a third voice in here that is the narrator voice that doesn't belong,
Yeah.
and most of the time it's not there, but every once in a
Every
while
once in a while it creeps in.
it
Yeah.
creeps in,
That's tough.
and so that was it was phenomenal.
That's great. That's exciting.
I would recommend hiring the dialogue doctor
Yeah.
anytime. What are you
That's
working on?
awesome. I am finishing the Dialogue Doctor book, much like you were describing. I wrote the book in November and December. Um, and then I got great. I sent it to you and a couple other people and got amazing notes on it. And then I really got in my head for,
Shocker.
I know, I got in my head for a good like 3 months. Well, I mean, we had other stuff going on. My wife
Yeah,
was
I
diagnosed
know.
with a degenerative disease, and like
I'm just
all these other things happened.
I'm
But
just giving you a hard time
yeah,
because
no, I deserve
you
it.
get in your head.
Yeah, but I did get in my head, and I got in my head around like, should I add AI stuff to this book? Should I add, kind of examples of masterworks? Should I add? And I just I've actually probably written like 3 or 4 versions of it now. And I finally just like, I was like, this is supposed to be a primer. So I like stripped all of that out and went back to just the like original work and the notes that y'all gave me. And so I'm almost done with that. I should be done with that this weekend, which I'm excited about.
No, I think that's
Um,
great. I think if you look at like what Shane's done with his nonfiction, what Joanna Penn does with hers, or Sasha Black, uh, multiple books that are small
yeah.
because people want to read something and then they want to turn around and do it.
Yeah. And I wrote
And
this
when
one. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, I was just saying when you write a 300-page craft book, people spend 4 months reading it because they're
Yeah.
doing other things, and then they're
Yeah.
like, well, what's that thing at the beginning or whatever.
Yeah.
So you want to,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you want it short.
And I wrote it to be a like almost a reference book. Like, how do I do this thing? And so hopefully it'll serve that way.
That's good.
Yeah, we'll see. But so I'm working on that, and that should be out soon. I have a book contract to write a memoir about kind of life post white evangelical church. So I'm gearing into that. I'm slowly writing that. It's due in 2 months, so I need to get
Be
on it.
less slow.
Yeah, I need to be less slow. I need to be more just get it done. Um, and that's a weird one. I don't know. I don't necessarily love writing nonfiction.
Mhm.
Um, so that's
Do-
a weird one.
Does Rachel Heron have a course for Fast Track Your Memoir?
She does, yeah. Yeah. And I've studied her stuff a lot, and it's really great.
She's
And
she's
yeah,
fabulous.
I've written 3 chapters, and I had to write a book proposal.
Mhm.
So when you write a book proposal, you have to outline every chapter. Um, so I have it. I literally just need to like find
Sit down
time
and write
to
it.
put my butt in the seat and write it.
Yeah.
Um, I do find though that like as I write nonfiction, because this isn't the first nonfiction thing I've written, as I write nonfiction, I find that I will discover usually I like for there to be some kind of metaphor that carries the book,
Mhm.
I find that I usually find the metaphor around chapter 3. So I found it in chapter 3, or chapter 4. I found it in chapter 4. And I've been like the last 2 weeks, I've been like tooling on a whiteboard around like, okay, how did the other chapters speak to that metaphor? But so we'll see how it comes out. But yeah, I'm working on that, and then I'm writing Nerds with JP. That's the Vela I write. That we just had our first volume published as a book in March, and we're writing season 2. And it's funny, I think for the first time that I've ever done a series like this, book 2 is going to be way better than book 1.
That's
Gonna be
great.
way better than book 1. The plot's better, the like, the stakes are better, the characters are better. Like it's just I felt like we really figured out what we were writing about 20 episodes into book 1. So about chapter 20 of 67 in book
Yeah.
1, we figured out what we were doing.
Okay, because I'm on
Yeah.
like chapter 35.
Yeah.
Uh, it's
Yeah.
a big book,
It's
people.
a big book. It's a big book.
Um, I
It's a
think
big
that's
book.
it. I mean, the episode is basically what the X-Files problem, right? Like
Mhm.
you want each episode to be entertaining, but you're trying to tell a longer story, and
Yeah.
or you then figure out, hey, we need a longer story. Um, or and people want a longer story.
People want a longer story.
Everybody
Yeah.
says that they love episodes, but when you look at like successful TV, it all is longer. Like one of my all-time favorites, Justified, first season episodic, second season they're like we're writing a novel
Yeah.
here,
Just
people.
go the full story. Yeah.
uh Good Place, it was like that. So people like, I mean, that's, they love the characters and they want a longer story. So now
Yeah.
you know that for season 2, I'm sure you've got the story in head
Yeah.
before you start.
And we're starting. And we did have it a little bit in season 1. I think in season 1 we finally figured out like this is how this world works better. Like I had a like when we came into it, the thing was based on a short story I wrote. I had kind of a concept of what it was going to be. Um, that concept was not funny or entertaining. And so it took us like probably 10 episodes to get away from that concept.
Mhm.
And then it took us like another 10 episodes to be like, oh, this is what this is about. It's not
Yeah.
actually about the ghosts. And it took us a while to get there to be like, oh, the ghosts are just a sideline to what's happening
Mhm.
in the book.
But even on the ghost level, on the sort of super, you know upper level plot level, in season 1 you guys are dropping little hints, but they're
Yeah.
tiny little hints,
Tiny hints,
and
very small.
which, yeah, which is, because it's entertaining, it's fine. But
Yeah.
if you have a stronger idea of what you're trying to tell, you can put those hints in
Yeah. And it
better.
is it is nice in book 2. We just got to like in season 2, we just got to start off with like, all right, we're off to the races.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason it feels like a better book because there's no world building. We're just like, there's no like, oh, we're not gonna assume you read book 1. We're like, nah, if you didn't read book 1, you're screwed. You gotta go.
Right.
You can't get into. Yeah, I gotta say, man, that whole like longer story thing. I was having this debate last night, and I'm not gonna share the name of the movie because I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But I took my boys and I went to a movie last night, and the movie literally ends in the middle of the story, and it just says to be continued.
Oof.
And it was 2 hours,
Yeah.
and we were so mad. In fact, the people behind us were really mad. They were like cussing, like yelling, cussing up a storm because you're like in the heat of action, and it's just like to be continued. And I was as a storyteller, I was sitting there. I was like, how do I feel about that? Because they've scheduled movie 2. It's a year away.
Right, but did they advertise it that way? I mean, like when
No.
they did Infinity War and Endgame,
Mm-mm.
they told you this was
Yeah,
what was
no,
coming.
there's no
uh,
well, and those two come to a conclusion.
they do,
Infinity
yeah.
War, this does not come to a
But
conclusion.
like Dune, I
Yeah.
guess I haven't seen Dune, but I think people were a little surprised that it only covered like the first 40% of
It's
the book, and they're like, "Yeah, we're making another one."
it's really
But I
funny.
can't remember when it came out if people knew beforehand that they were making
I
another one.
think they did. I think they advertised Dune as there's going to be 3 of these.
Okay.
But yeah, this one I was not prepared. And we had a
Yeah.
whole conversation on the way home of like, if the problem is that the story's 4 hours, I think I just would want the 4 hours. I would have sat there and watched because I was in it. I was so in it. And
And
when they, yeah,
books are the
sorry.
same way. There's a book that I recommend, a YA book that I adore, and I always feel bad recommending it because it cliffhangers, and I don't want to tell people that because then they don't buy it
Yeah, yeah,
because people hate it that much. But people who buy it read it and they read the other two and they love it. There's actually a couple YA trilogies like that I can think
yeah,
of, but this one's called The Knife of Never Letting Go, and it's so damn good, but it just ends and you're like, what the hell?
yeah,
Um, so you really have to read the second one, at least
yeah.
with things like you know Six of Crows and Cricket Kingdom, which is just like one of the all-time greats. They close the big box and then they open a box for book two right at the end, and
Interesting.
it's a little frustrating, but
Yeah,
like basically they get, not spoiler, but they get all of the team gets back except for one, which has been kidnapped,
yeah,
and that's the end of book one. And they're like, okay,
interesting.
book two, they're going to get they're
Yeah,
going to get her back.
yeah.
Um,
This movie was fascinating in that, like, I will say, I think something that the write fast, publish hard, like publish fast period of publishing that I think we're coming out of. Um, one of the really smart gifts it gave us, I think, is the idea that you write a whole series before you publish the first book. If they hadn't have had this movie ready, like the second movie done, because
mhm,
it's evidently in the can. Because I came home, I immediately started like researching. It's
right.
evidently in the can and done. It's just like they're just spacing them out. If they hadn't have done that, and then they had hit the writer's strike,
Yeah,
we might have never
right.
gotten the second. Like,
And what's this, a less and less and less factor here is the movie theater, right?
Mhm.
So 6 months from now, this thing's going to be on Disney Plus or wherever, and you're just going to watch the second one,
Yeah, you're just gonna go watch the second one right away.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
And so it's kind of interesting how the streaming services are trying to recreate the like weekly. Instead,
yeah,
Netflix drops a whole series, but Apple and some of the other, Disney is trying to do thing to sort of string you along.
yeah,
But I'm not sure how long that will last, because that,
yeah. I don't
I
know.
think the human taste is for give me the whole thing right now.
Yeah,
Um, but
yeah,
writers out there, if you're thinking of cliffhangering, you will get trashed on ratings on Amazon
yeah.
if you leave a cliffhanger
Cliffhanger.
without making it clear at the beginning that
Yeah, this
it's
is
part
book
one.
one of whatever.
Yeah, not
Yeah,
book one, part one, right?
yeah. You got to be clear.
You got to be clear.
Yeah, yeah. I guess the fourth thing I'm working on is I am slowly taking my novel and turning it into a screenplay, um, which is a fascinating exercise that I've never done before. And it made me really sad because I was, in turning it into a screenplay, forcing myself to visualize, like, how does this get told on the screen? And I was like, oh, I have to cut the first 4 chapters. So now I'm left with and the story actually works perfectly fine without them. So now I'm left with the dilemma of like, wait, do I cut the first 4 chapters of the book too? Like, do I put out a second edition and I just
That
take out the first 4 chapters?
that goes back to that question of like,
Oh,
do you move on, or do you, a lot of people,
yeah,
most people say move on.
yeah,
You know, I'm
yeah,
sure Seth Godin would be like, just move on
yeah. Seth
and
Godin would tell me stop it. Yeah,
write your next book without an extraneous first 4 chapters.
yeah. But it's, the book had a failed launch, and I keep telling my part of the reason I wanted to write the screenplay is I was like, this one, I've failed launches before. I've just been like, all right, I just got to move on. This one had a really bad failed launch, and part of it wasn't me. Part of it was Ingram messed up my paperbacks,
Mhm.
and then like was very slow to fix them, and still hasn't fixed the paperback on Barnes and Noble a year later, even though I've emailed them probably like, 50, 60 times of like, hey, can you please fix this thing? Um, so, and it is just they uploaded the proof cover instead of the real cover. And so
Mhm.
it has proof all over the front of it, which is not a cover I ever gave them. Like that's a cover they made.
Right.
Um, so it's a weird, you know, I had people like, hey, can you get the paperback up on Amazon? It never appeared on Amazon. I'm pretty sure because Amazon was like, we're not putting a cover up here that has proof all over it. So it's just a weird, it's a weird, it was a weird launch that kind of failed. So part of me is like, this book needs a second chance. Like I need to relaunch this
Yeah.
thing.
In that case, go for it.
Yeah. But as I'm doing the screen, and that's part of the reason I was like, I'm going to do the screenplay to give me maybe some energy and a different perspective around it. But as I'm doing the screenplay, I'm like, oh, the opening is terrible. Like I should cut the yeah. So I think I'm gonna relaunch that. But that's the fourth thing I'm working on right now. As if one isn't enough. You
Yeah.
have to have like 5 projects at one time. Yeah.
That's a lot from a craft thing there. I had the great delight this week of discovering something from a long time ago, uh, which I just love, and it's the only good thing about the internet. Uh,
It
is
really it,
is
it
that I
really
was talking
is.
with a friend, and I was like, when I was in high school, which was the 80s, my friends and I found these cassettes like in a thrift shop that was a radio show,
Interesting.
and it was like a 1940s mystery radio show, but it was actually done in the early 70s, and it was totally full of philosophy because they were on some crazy shrooms.
Yeah.
And it's all about Buddhism and Sufism
Fascinating.
and thought patterns and all
Yeah.
this stuff. But it's written like a 1940s serial with these over-the-top characterizations and bad sound effects, and it's called The Fourth Tower of Inverness,
Oh,
and
that's
it's
the perfect name for what you're describing.
and because the young guy who's a hitchhiker by
Yeah.
trade comes to his is called to his aunt's castle where he sees four towers, but everyone tells him there's only three.
Nice.
Um,
Oh,
the
great premise.
the whole premise is great,
Great
but
premise.
it is so self-indulgent and side things and whatever. But um, it's on Spotify. Of course, it's on
Of course
Spotify.
it's on Spotify.
Everything is on Spotify, and in some
Yeah.
ways, that was a little disappointing because it was like this idea that you this idea that you could find a sort of secret nugget and share it with your friends
Yeah. Yeah.
is in the early days of the internet, it just expanded the group of friends that you could share it with.
Yeah.
But now you can share it with everybody, and in 20 minutes, everybody will be looking at something else,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is kind of sad. No matter how damn good your like whatever your niche is, right?
Yeah.
Whatever you do, no matter how good your ice sculptures are, you'll throw them up there. The internet will go, wow. And then 5 minutes later,
Be
they'll
like,
move on to something
wow.
else.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Wow.
I
Yeah.
find that sad. But what from a craft standpoint, I'm re-listening to these, and of course, like they're racist and sexist and
Yeah.
everything you can think of, but they're full of big ideas. Um, but they have the main character who's very well drawn, and all the other characters, even though they all have funny voices, they sound like they're written by the same person.
Interesting.
And and I think I'm thinking about you turning your book into a screenplay, and like a radio play is even harsher than a screenplay
Yeah.
because it's truly dialogue. I mean, there was a narrator, but the narrator didn't come
Yeah.
in very much, only really when they needed to move them from scene to scene. all
Yeah.
of the all of the scenes themselves didn't have the narrator, it's just the dialogue, and
Yeah.
they have to figure out how to put all the information in, and the scenes that are great, and the scenes that are bad are like, oh, my aunt told me that you used to work at the such and such, and so and so it's fun as it's a lesson. So I think turning anything into a screenplay would be a lesson in how to make your dialogue better in the scene. um
It's an interesting exercise. And I actually am doing it because I think I heard JD Barker say it. I can't remember. I'm gonna give
I
him
know
credit.
JD and Jay were talking a lot about doing dialogue only first drafts a long time ago.
Yeah,
Is
they were
that right?
talking about that a long time ago, but this was something that I think I heard JD say at a conference I went to a couple of years ago, where he was like, "I always write the screenplay before I publish the book."
Just in case they want one, you'd be like, hey,
Well, just in case they
you
want
don't have
one,
to
but
hire
also,
somebody.
yeah, also because you learn a lot about the book when you do that.
Mhm.
Because you're like, what the screenplay forces you to do is focus solely on character interactions.
Yeah.
And you learn like I'm seeing a lot of like, oh, I don't need this. Like I don't
Mhm.
need this description. I don't need this thing. I don't need this world building. Like the reason I put those first four chapters in was because I was like, I have to build the world.
Yeah.
And I need these first four chapters to build the world. And I got to chapter four and I was like, you know what? The world is built within like 30 seconds in this interaction with this other guy. Like
Mhm.
there's no need to. So it just forces efficiency, I think, which is an interesting exercise. But yeah. Okay, you and I both read uh the lives. I keep wanting to call it the Secret Lives of Puppets
And I
because
want to call it In the Lives of Others, which was a movie
yeah,
a few years ago. Yeah.
it's the lives of puppets
It's In the Lives of
in the
Puppets.
lives of puppets
Yeah.
by TJ Klune, who I will continue to say I think is one of our greatest living writers.
Yes. And
Um,
I want to tie in what I was.
oh, go for it.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, jumping. I didn't know if you had any structure for this or
No,
not,
I just wanted to talk about
but
the
I was
book because
thinking
it's
back about the
incredible.
book, and I like to talk about craft. One, because that's what people are here for.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
as sparkling as we,
They're not just here to see
as
us hang out.
as
Yeah,
sparkling as we two white guys might be.
this,
Um, you know,
no one has called me
we could
sparkling
create,
ever.
we could create our own Johnny, Sean, and Dave podcast if we wanted to, but we
Oh,
don't
we
want to.
totally could.
We don't want to do that to people.
Yeah.
They don't know that we've already. You say you don't edit, but you've cut like 6 hours out of this conversation already. Uh, the what I wanted to talk about looking at it was that on a hero's journey type story, and for those of you who don't know what that is basically where you're following one person or one group of people through the whole story.
Mhm.
In that kind of story, everybody else is a hazard character.
Mhm.
And as you always say, those hazard characters have to be big. And I think Klune does an exceptionally good job of that. There's only one character that I was like, too big. I'd be interested to see who you think that might be. But you don't want any character. You don't want somebody who's like the doorman, and they're like, "Oh, hi, come on in." You don't want that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's you want bigger hazard characters, and I think he does that really, really well. I mean, you can't read that book without thinking about the Wizard of Oz, and every hazard character in the Wizard of
Mhm.
Oz is
It's
huge.
huge. Yeah, and it
Right?
is a like it is a I would say he combined. I'm trying to get him on the show, and if I get him on the show, I'm going to talk to him about it. But I want to say there's definitely a like it's like a Wizard of Oz Pinocchio type
Yeah.
story. There's definitely themes of both of those in there. Um
Um,
Pinocchio really it is kind of a retelling of Pinocchio. It
mhm.
even down to the like well the story takes place in a future where I'm not going to give huge spoilers, but there's a young man who lives with robots in a forest, and they go on a journey together through this world to, I would say, reestablish their home is kind of the basic theme. Is that fair
Yeah.
without giving
Yeah.
spoilers?
Or I mean, you could another sort of classic trope is everything's fine in his world until something is taken from him, and it's a journey to
Yeah, it's a journey to
reset the
get that
status
back.
quo.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And he's got three companions with him. And I don't know how we talk about the book without talking about this.
you've got to.
There's three companions. There's a vacuum cleaner named Rambo who's incredibly anxious. Um, and I don't know, how would you describe Rambo's voice? Because I don't want to say delusional.
No, we talked about this a little bit in Slack,
Yeah.
where I was comparing it to how Sesame Street has specific ages in mind for their
Yeah.
Muppets,
Yeah.
and somebody was like, "You just blew my mind."
Yeah.
But they do that for the psychological and developmental things they're trying to get across to kids
Yeah.
and parents, right? Like, okay, Elmo's 3.5 and Big Bird is 6, and when
Yeah.
something happens, they have appropriate responses for that age.
Yeah.
I feel like Rambo is a very rambunctious, like 6 or 7 year old boy who
Yeah.
it's
That's
like,
a good
are we
way.
going to do this? Are we going to go solve that?
Yeah.
We're awesome. We are so awesome. Wait, are we awesome?
Are
Are
you
we
my
awesome?
friend? You're my friend. You're my
Yeah,
best friend. You're
yeah.
my best friend ever. Yeah.
Yeah. But
It's
and
true.
some of the lines from Rambo, like, we are going to get so killed.
Yeah. Oh, he's such a great
It's
character.
it's a great
Yeah.
character, but that's how I sort of saw him, as a super naive,
Yeah.
but super energetic character. So
Yeah. And then
that's
you have
Rambo.
Nurse Ratchet, who is an ex-nurse robot that is sociopathic. Sociopathic but loyal, I would say.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think one of the things that's easy to forget about Nurse Ratchet is that, again, without too many spoilers, she has not had a patient in a very long time,
Yeah.
except for Vic.
Except for Vic,
So
who's
that
the young man they run around with.
and
Yeah.
that and her purpose is to heal people and help people and keep people safe. So she's now has all of her focus on
On
one
Vic.
person, and
Yeah.
it makes her a bit sociopathic.
Yeah.
And it's the I think he's playing with that sense of like, we all want to have a purpose, right?
Yeah.
But a robot is specifically designed for a purpose, and then when you take that purpose away, like, sorry, you can't operate on anyone. She wants to
Yeah.
operate on everybody.
Yeah.
And when we get to voice, I'd love to hear the trick about her having a screen that will display
Oh
things
man.
different to
Yeah.
what she's saying is so great.
Yeah.
It
So
reminds me of the old Looney Tunes characters where they'd like hold up a sign, right? They'd be
yeah,
saying
it
one
was the
thing and then
best.
hold up a sign and be like, nope.
Yeah, and it was so funny what the screen displays. So she has a screen that like will show a picture that he describes with like one sentence. And it's often like, she'll be like, I think our chances of success are 80%. As her screen read, we're all going to die. Like
Yeah.
it's just this like, you know, really funny. I thought it was an amazing voice. Like it really gave text without the screen. Her voice is incredibly dark,
Yeah.
but the screen added a massive amount of humor to her that made her a relatable character. Without the screen, I don't think I could read her. I'd be like, this character is too dark and weird. But
Mm-hmm.
the screen like tempered her strangeness. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? Yeah. Is that how you felt about it, or did you see
Yeah.
the
I thought
screen?
the screen was hilarious, and gave her this gallows humor that, I don't know. It was great, especially with Rambo.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The two of them together are so night and day. They're fantastic.
Yeah.
And then the third character is Hap, which stands for hysterically angry puppet. And he's this kind of dark and brooding, you know, few words, never speaks more than a few words, really. But again, like fiercely loyal
Yeah.
character.
I
Yeah.
want to say he's like Roy Kent, but you still haven't watched Ted
I
Lasso.
haven't watched Ted Lasso.
Oh,
I don't have Apple. Yeah, my wife and I keep talking about like, okay, let's turn something else off so we can turn that on and
yeah,
watch it.
just
So
turn it on for I mean,
yeah,
we only have Apple to watch that, and we're gonna
yeah,
turn it off. It is it just to digress, but we're watching it with our 12 and 14-year-old, and it's utterly filled with foul language and
yeah.
sexual innuendo and kindness and humanity uh overflowing. So it's this
That's
I mean,
great.
it's
Yeah,
it's at first you're like, oh my god, this language, and then you're just like, I don't care, it's more important
it's
that
so great. Yeah,
yeah. But anyway, Roy
yeah.
Kent is very much like Hap. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Um, yeah, and I know who the character is. That's a really great comparison. Because I do watch YouTube clips every once in a while. I'll be like, I just want to see what's going on. Um, yeah. So, that's voices. Was the voice you thought over the top the Blue Fairy?
No, it was the collector.
Yeah, he was pretty big.
He was really
Yeah,
big, and he big is good, but it was
yeah.
that he was big and that he was on the page for too long.
He was on the page
If
for
he had
very
been
long.
that big for one scene, it would have been fine. But he's actually in like 5 or 6 scenes in a row,
Yeah,
and he gets kind of repetitive, and um,
Yeah, and he has a turn. I can tell that there's a place where Klune or an editor was like, okay, I got to wrap this up
Yeah.
because he doesn't have a full arc. He kind
No.
of starts an arc and then it's like, all right, we got to get away from this guy.
Right.
We got to move on. We got to
Yeah.
move on. Yeah.
The um yeah, but I started this conversation by saying, you know, your hazard characters have to be large,
Mhm.
because um it just makes it so much better.
Yeah.
And they don't feel as large to the reader as they feel to you, probably. Uh,
Yeah, and I think part of what he does really well is his engine character, Vic, that you're following, is the straight man.
yeah.
And everybody else around him is a giant voice. And Vic is the like, yeah, the
But
stable rock you can
yeah,
relate to. Yeah.
but like every time, and it's gonna feel forced and it's gonna feel too big, but like every time there's a waiter or a toll booth man
Yeah.
or just somebody who's helping you get a piece of business done, just make them bigger or skip that part, right? Like
Yeah.
just skip that part, like they had dinner.
Yeah. Moving on.
Right.
Yeah, there's a scene where they're walking through a city and they're accosted by a salesperson. And the voice of the salesperson, he's on the page for like maybe half a page. His voice is huge.
Yeah.
It's so big. Yeah.
And I was also thinking in that same section of the book, they're sort of smuggled to a place, because the collector has basically blackmailed this other guy, and the
Yeah.
other guy's voice is great. It's
Oh,
not over the top, but he's not just like, he didn't even need to be in the book, but he's in
no.
the book, and so he's like, I can't believe I agreed to do this. I'm so screwed.
Yeah.
Why did I let myself do this? And he's just there. I mean, he's really there.
Yeah. And it's fascinating because he's the opposite of the collector. Again, like pairing
Right.
voices, they're like super diverse. The collector's voice is very showman-y and very
Yeah.
oddly optimistic at all times. And
You have
then you give this like smuggler character, and he is extremely pessimistic and very like, I don't want to say dour, but just worried.
Well, he's anxious, and what the collector does is the collector is optimistic, but in such a in a completely fake way, right?
Yeah.
He's just whitewashes everything,
Yeah.
which is not what you want to be playing against when you're anxious, and so it really throws up those sparks. Those two voices together are particularly good because one is expressing anxiety and the other is failing to acknowledge the anxiety.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when you hurt yourself and someone's like, "Oh, it's nothing."
Yeah. And I think part of what you were saying earlier about your own work, the like making sure these voices are the voices in every single paragraph.
Yeah.
Clune's voices never waver. They are
No.
always exactly who they are. And it's so hard to do. Like I think especially when you're like that's where I think writers like Klune move from like, hey, this guy is good to like, yeah, this guy's a master
Yeah.
we're gonna remember is the like he doesn't there is no place where I'm like, oh, you kind of lost Rambo there. He never does. It's always spot on. Yeah,
Did you hear him on Sasha Black's
I
podcast?
did.
Of course
I
you did.
did. Yeah.
Uh, and it was interesting because there was one point where I was about to call bullshit on him and he dialed it back, where she was asking about voices and he's like, Rambo just comes to me. He's not supposed to be in as many scenes, but Nurse Ratched would say something and I would just hear Rambo saying, so I'd have to put it
Yeah.
in and it just comes to me. And then he stopped and he was like, but I put a lot of work into it. I'm like, of course you put a lot of work
Yeah.
into it. And that's what I want to hear about. I don't want to hear
Yeah.
about voices magically coming to you.
No,
I
I
want
want
to
to
hear
hear
about
about how you built that voice. Yeah.
how you build that voice. And you talked a little bit about it, but just the
Yeah.
acknowledgement that like he is building voices and he's building voices with a purpose.
Yeah. And he's so good. And like if it were one book, I'd be like, oh, you pulled that off well. But this is the third book in a row that I've read where I'm like, these voices are incredible. Like they're beyond what I've seen another author do,
And he
which
could do a
is
radio, you could do a radio show of that,
yeah.
even though I described it as like the best Pixar movie I've never read
Yeah,
or never seen.
never
But
seen, yeah.
uh because it's also joyously visual. I can totally
Oh
see
yeah.
these things, but it could be a radio show with uh, almost no narrator, and you would know all the voices, and he would propels the plot forward with the voices without it sounding didactic.
Yeah, you could pull. I think Vic has a lot of inner thought. Um, but outside of that, everything happens in the present scene,
Yeah.
which is really fantastic. Um, yeah, he does an interesting thing too, and he does it. I've seen it in multiple times in his books, that I think is an interesting craft technique. He lies to the reader. He'll put scenes in that aren't real, and then you find out later in the book that they're not real.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
Um,
I've seen him do it in multiple books, but he'll flat out lie to the reader. He'll be like,
yeah.
"This is," he'll give you a scene, and then later you'll find out, like, no, that's how I wanted it to be. That's not how it actually went down. Yeah,
The I was also thinking, just as you were saying that, a tool he's using a little bit to make these voices so on the page is that um, he's using characters that don't have an inner monologue. So like Hap could be very brooding and trying to figure out his place in the world because he was a bad guy and now he's a good guy and whatever. But he can't do that because he's a machine.
yeah,
And he does the same thing in Cerulean Sea because they're kids.
they're children. Yeah,
And it's just their emotions are coming out of them.
yeah, it's
And
just raw.
so there's no scenes in Cerulean Sea where one of the kids is having a deep sort of crisis in their mind
Yeah,
that would be prose in a book.
yeah,
All of their crisis, all their conflict, all their conquests are on the page because that's how kids
yeah,
work.
yeah,
And that's how would you describe the thought process of a robot, right? It's
yeah,
just there. So he uh,
yeah. It's all super present. And that's very true. I hadn't thought about that before, but that's very true. Is that their emotions are raw. Well, and something else he's a master of is getting to that emotional moment in the plot, and then just stopping and making you sit in it, and making you like feel what that character is feeling. And he's so in the Secret Life of Pets, in the puppet book. Um he there's I know exactly you know exactly what scene I'm talking about. There's like the big tragedy, and then you just sit in the tragedy for pages, and it
yeah.
works perfectly. He's arranged the plot so the characters can't move on, they're stuck where they are,
Mhm.
but you just have to watch them grieve, and it is so painful. It's so like just heart-wrenching. He does it in Under the Cerulean Sea too, when he because I reread that book with my college student. I listened to it when I was driving him home from college. uh it was my second time with it, and he does it too at the end of that book. He makes the lead character go home and
Yeah.
be alone, and you're reading it and you're like, oh, the second time I was reading, I was like, oh, I think 90% of us as writers would skip this scene, would skip this
Right.
moment, but he
Because,
puts them in. Yeah,
because you know, as a reader, you know where it's going.
yeah, you know what's
So
going to
part of
happen.
you is like, oh God, just get there. In fact, when I'm editing, those are parts that I'm often taking out.
Yeah, but he
But
does them
that's
so well.
well, he does them well, and also they're focused on the emotions. So sometimes those parts are not focused on the emotions. And you're like, okay, get that out of there. Like we know where it's going, just go there. But if you do that without, oh, we talked about this before with the John Green book,
Yeah, yeah,
where like the movie took all those parts out,
yeah,
and
yeah,
you're like, I'm not following the emotional journey because it's happening
yeah,
too fast. So when it's just a question of plotting, if there's a way to get that out of there, I always recommend you do. But yeah, that being aware that sometimes the emotions take longer to show
yeah. And I love what you're saying
is
there about
important.
the whole like the point of this scene is the emotion, because that's super true.
Right.
I don't think I would have put it that way on my own, but what you're saying is
I
I think
mean,
it's very
right, Cerulean Sea, you know he's going back.
Yeah. Oh,
There's no way
that's
he's not.
there's no way he's not going
Right.
back. Yeah.
Um,
He's totally going back, but you have to watch him wander around his apartment alone.
yeah.
And in this
The
book,
neighbor. Oh, the neighbor was such a big voice in that book.
oh,
He's so great.
the neighbor was great. Yeah. And this, yeah, the neighbor with her always like quasi weirdly pushing her son, but not pushing her son.
Yes,
Yeah.
tearing Linus down and at the same time
Yeah. At
pushing
the
the
same time.
relationship
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. But in the puppets, the scene where we're talking about it's so painful. I wanted it to move on. I was like,
Mhm.
don't make me sit in this emotion anymore. This is so hard. And he just was like, nope, we're here for another 3 pages. You're
Yeah,
gonna watch this character like emotionally crumble.
yeah,
Um, yeah, it's so, and the voice modulation is perfect. He takes he takes a character that's doesn't talk a lot and is very internal, and in that moment completely shuts him down while all of the other characters around him spin,
yeah.
and that character just Vic just closes off. And it's so, what makes it work is the other characters around him panicking that he's closed off. And it's yeah, it was great. It's really great.
And again, like Ted Lasso, you have to not be afraid to be called mawkish. I mean, I love that book so much.
Oh.
In the Lives of Puppets, loved it, loved every minute of it, and it is wholesome is the wrong word, but my God, it is a forthright book about kindness and family, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it sure it's got sarcasm, it's got wit, but there's no sort of like world weary undercutting of the message.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's hard for people to open up and really write about what they care about. God
Yeah.
knows I don't.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's really deep, there's really in this, like, you know, what you're calling like a Pixar type book. There's incredibly deep themes happening around like purpose and life and
Right.
what does it mean to have a mission and what does it mean to like live for something, and is that good? Like, is the idea that everybody has purpose a good idea? Like, it's just an interesting, and like, what is freedom? And it's such a fascinating, what is the purpose of
Yeah.
chaos in the world? Like, it's just there's really deep things happening in the book. But yeah. What else, anything else you think we can learn from it that you'd be like, this is something?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I have very few criticisms, but if I had one, it's that you don't have to put every single joke in just because you thought of it. And he said himself, and he said himself in that interview, like Rambo would just pop up, right,
Yeah.
with a one extra. But there's a
Yeah.
few scenes where there's like, I want to, got to get Ratchet in there, got to get Rambo in there, got
Yeah.
to get Ratchet coming back at Rambo, got to get Rambo acting clueless, got to get Vic saying, "Okay, everybody, we have to move on." Right?
Yeah.
It's there was a few that I would have trimmed a bit. I think he was a little self indulgent on the dialogue, but it's because the characters are
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you write
so
characters
good.
like that, you get to be as self-indulgent as you
Yeah.
want.
Um,
You can get away with that crap.
I
Yeah.
thought he did a really good job of this is something I certainly don't bring up in my book and you don't hear craft people talking about, but the sort of um ag- uh, the agnostic force, like not quite the villain, but not quite the hero. And you see
Yeah.
it a lot in epics.
Yeah.
But like in this case, it's the blue fairy, um or what is that, what was the name of the person
The
in
blue
charge of the
fairy.
whole thing?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
blue fairy.
All right. I
Yeah.
didn't want to confuse them with the like AI thing that was running around that place being annoying as hell.
I can't remember what they
Um,
called that, but it was also like part of the blue
part
fairy.
of the blue
They
fairy.
kind of had
But
a joint name for them.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really enjoy in books these ideas of this sort of not really an agent of chaos, but somebody with completely their own agenda who is gonna help the protagonist if it serves them, but not if it doesn't serve them.
Yeah.
Um,
And you're
and
not sure if they're actually helping.
right.
Like, I don't know if
Uh,
you're actually helping. Yeah.
yeah. So I like that. And I like to see more of that because
Yeah.
it throws a little wrench into the straight up, here comes the bad guy. You know, otherwise hero's journey movies sometimes have too much of the video game influence in them, in that like we're leveling up towards the big bad, we're leveling
Yeah.
up towards the big bad, we're defeating these smaller bads along the way, and they don't often have that hugely powerful character who comes in from the side and shakes up the whole bottle.
Yeah.
And you know, can say, and sometimes that's a, I mean, I've seen it in some movies where it's a natural force, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a hurricane or something that gets
Yep.
right in the middle of the problem. And I think that's generally something to think about, to when you're trying to complicate, when you're trying to make your story more nuanced and complicated, is that you can have uh, characters that are very forceful but are not directly antagonists.
Yeah. That's a great point. I think another thing that I took away from it, and from his, I'm taking away from his writing in general as I read him, is that you can have a heartwarming ending without it being perfect. And
Yes.
so, as somebody who just came out of a season of dealing with aging parents, the ending of this book is very real. And the like way he depicts someone who's lost themselves, as all of us do with age. um Again, like, beautiful ending, but
Mhm.
very hard. Like, there's a scene in the end, again, trying not to spoil things. There's a scenes in the end where one of the characters is kind of coming back to themselves, and they're flipping back and forth between who they were and who they became, like kind of the younger version of themselves and the older version of themselves. And the whole time it's happening, I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm talking to my parents with dementia.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
it feels so much like dementia. And so it's not the perfect ending. There's not a perfect bow on it,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
you still leave feeling like this was beautiful. And
Yeah.
so there's yeah.
And I feel like that's something he learned from Cerulean Sea, that like
This really does kind of have a perfect bow.
wrapping everything up perfectly isn't necessarily, it's satisfying and it feels good, but as a writer you kind of want to be, if you're trying to be true to human emotion, that you can, there's other alternatives out there that
Yeah.
are that still work and still give people a really satisfying feeling, but acknowledge that like that's, uh it's like a rom-com, right? Like they, everything's fine at the end and you're like, well, these people still have 30 years to live together, right?
Yeah. And
Like this
there,
idea that the story's
yeah,
going to continue
yeah,
and be a struggle is
yeah.
lost in a lot of storytelling.
Yeah. Well, and there's this, like, it makes beautiful character change, because through the story we see Vic grow from a child
Mhm.
to a young adult. And when he comes home, he it doesn't go back to the way it was. Right? Like, he's changed, everybody's changed, and it doesn't return to how it was. It doesn't return to even as good as it was, but it returns to something different. And
Yeah,
there's
and I thought
some
that
beauty in
was,
that. Yeah.
I thought that was wonderfully done, and also sort of a step forward from Cerulean Sea. As we sit here, and I just spent 5 minutes trying to describe that agnostic character of chaos,
Yeah.
it's the Wizard of Oz,
Yeah. Yeah.
which we had already talked about. The
Yeah.
wizard is not the antagonist
No,
of that
he's just an
story.
agent of chaos.
He's
But
total agent of chaos.
yeah, the blue fairy's done better.
Yeah, but they show up, they get to Oz, and they get to the castle, and Oz is like, I'm just the man behind the curtain, right? Like
Yeah.
he's revealed and
Yeah.
then he gives them very, very dubious advice, like
Yeah.
go kill the witch,
Yeah.
right? Like, is that a good idea?
Yeah. And
I
I
don't
think my
know.
problem with the wizard is that he's so selfish, because he wants them to go on this journey so that he can go home. He doesn't actually care about them.
Right.
The blue fairy is very altruistic in a
Yeah.
way that, like, the blue fairy doesn't actually care about them because it has a bigger mission
Yes.
of what's going on. Yeah. It's an interesting, yeah, it is a really wonderful kind of turn in that, like,
Yeah.
there's
I
a,
just I think it's a huge takeaway in terms of like things to put in your craft arsenal.
yeah,
Is the
it, yeah, it's also a great example of how you can take an old story and put new life into it. Which I think is really important as well. Um,
and
yeah, so
also how you can for idea generation. I mean, basically he was like, okay, I'm gonna write Pinocchio, but instead of the boy being created, the father is going to be created.
yeah,
And then the
yeah,
story unfolds. It's like Neil Gaiman. If you watch Neil Gaiman's masterclass, he's like talking about story. He's like, just put two random things together
yeah.
and see what happens.
See
Right?
what happens, see where it
Ask
goes.
questions like, okay, you want to write a vampire novel, but you don't want to write a traditional vampire novel. Like, what happens when a vampire bites another vampire?
Yeah,
What happens when a vampire bites a chair? Like, he just sort
yeah,
of gets like wild. Like, so
yeah,
take something that's known and just find a juxtaposition
yeah.
for creating new ideas.
Whenever I get stuck for new ideas, and I haven't been stuck for years, but whenever I get stuck for new ideas, I would go to Wikipedia, and they have all of the Grimm's fairy tales listed in like a numerical order. And so I would pull up a random number generator on my computer, and I would pick two numbers. And then I would look at those two stories because they're short. Their stories are always like, 2,000 words. I would pick two stories. I'd be like, all right, how do I write these as one story? And that was something I was doing back when I was writing, like, a short story
Short
every
stories,
night
yeah.
for a year. But yeah, it's a great way to get, like, just taking two weird ideas and being like, I'm gonna force these together. Um, to make. Now, if you do it with the Grimm's fairy tales like I do, you're gonna end up writing dark fantasy because they're all like really dark and weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, yeah. Okay, anything else we want to say about the house on the Cerulean Sea before we move on from it?
Or in the lives of kids.
Or in the lives of puppets? Oh
No, I'm good.
man, I did it again. Sorry. Yeah,
You've
about
it's
Klune.
taken you a while, but you at least you've got the title to Cerulean Sea correct, so
I
that's
do.
good.
Oh man, it took me like a year. Yeah. The house in this sea of Cerulean, the Cerulean house, the sea house on the Cerulean Ocean. Yeah. Um, okay, so what's an issue you're pondering right now?
Uh, so many, but um, I think more than an issue, something that I think everybody struggles with that I just want to be Jeff-like and offer some calming advice, which is time is a bastard.
Oh man, time sucks.
And I was just thinking about it when you were talking about generating ideas, and I remember being like everyone else, how do people come up with all these ideas? Like, how do you get and people would be like, oh, writers would be, I have so many ideas, I'm never going to get to them. And I thought, I'm never going to be there. And now I wake up in the morning, I'm like, I had a weird dream. That would be a great story. And I write it down and I'm never going to
Yeah,
get
never gonna do it.
to it.
Yeah.
And we were talking off camera about like just going to softball games and sitting and watching your kid play softball in a beautiful summer night and like being able to enjoy that and not think, oh my God, there's so much I'm not getting done.
Yeah.
And I think, just like it ties into the question I brought for you, which is, should we be actively trying to kill the idea that being an author as a profession is a legit thing? What service do we offer our writers
By promoting this idea.
by promoting this idea? Or just how do you talk about commercial viability with a writer that you're working with? But getting ahead of myself, but I think, just like you gotta let go and just do the things that you can. Um, and
Yeah.
I'm reading a book about overwhelm because I just feel like we're moving into this space where there's so much to do and everybody feels bad about it.
Yeah.
Do you know anybody who's like, I totally got my work done, I'm feeling great?
I do, but I don't like those people. There is a like weird in our universe of characters, there's a weird character I interact with every once in a while that I would call the like entrepreneur bro character
Yeah.
type, who's like, I'm making money right now. And there's an extreme confidence to them that, yes, I think they feel like they are doing everything all the time. They
Yeah.
are. And so, but
That's
I
not me.
yeah, that's not me. And I don't find many creatives that live in that headspace.
Hmm.
Because I think the act of creation requires a deep empathy and empathy and humility in the entrepreneur bro world space is a liability. So there's a
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm just trying to work with clients more in a concept of, you know, just how do we tell the story that you want to tell and that you're happy with, and you're happy with your process and journey, right?
Yeah. And I think the idea of financial viability, I'm sorry, I'm hedging because I'm going to get into trouble. This is this is something everybody's going to hate this answer. All sides are going to hate this answer. Um, this is something I've been really pondering with AI, um, with the like, the deep language learning models that we currently have going, that as we use them more and more, we learn that what currently exists at the present time of this recording are really great things for writing fiction,
Mhm.
but they're not great at like, not yet, at like fact finding or research, or
Yeah.
because they don't know what facts are. So, um, understand like, and then the like chaos, panic, or jubilation that's causing around the speed at which these will help you write fiction, and what that's the speculation around what that's going to do to the market and how that's going to change everything. I think what is actually like what I see actually happening is the death of the, hey, if you just write a book a month, you'll have 50K after 10 of them. The death of that myth, I think, is what we're seeing. Because I think what we've learned is that for some authors that is 100% true, but the vast majority of authors who tried that, we saw burnout.
Yeah. But there's
Uh,
also the myth of, if my book is good enough,
yeah,
it will be noticed and it will be triumphed. And I hear that over and over and over again. I'm just like, I
yeah,
don't think that's
that's
true.
not true. And it's you know, but that was, I feel like that myth has been around longer. The myth of the great American novel. I'm going to
Mhm.
write the great American novel and it's going to set my place in history, has been around since, the 1800s, since like Melville was writing novels. Um, the the myth of like write fast, write hard, publish, repeat. Quality doesn't matter, mediocre. It's about hitting the tropes. I really think, well, Becca Syme said something that I've in a quick cast that I've opened a door for me, kind of in speculation and thought about this, which was that actually really died in like 2018. And we've all just been living with this myth. But once it became a pay to play, the myth of like, oh, I can just do this and put it out
Right.
and I don't have to pay to get it seen was over.
No, but
You can, yeah,
go ahead. Sorry. I was just saying
no,
that there's another myth that I can pay to get it seen, right?
yeah,
Because there are people who are making good money using Facebook ads and AMS ads, but it's not a silver bullet. It's
no,
extremely hard to make
it's
work.
extremely hard.
Everything has
Yeah.
to work just right, and it's a full-time job.
And you often need to be a little and nowadays you need to have a network to help you get that boost, to get that pay to
Mhm.
play to work. So I think it's hard to say like what does a viable author career look like, because I think we're in a big moment of change.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of speculation and there's a lot of like, what is this, even with like screenwriters, right? Like they're on strike right now
Uh-huh.
because they're like, we see a future in which Netflix never lets us be the head writer again. And their pay structure is based on who is the head writer and then who is the punch up and who is and they're like, they're going to turn all of us into punch up writers.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's what AI, and
Yeah.
I was so pleased that we had gone so long without talking about AI, but that's what AI returns right now is stuff that needs punching up.
Yeah.
It's
And
mediocre.
that's why that's one of the reasons, like I've been following the WGA strike very closely, because I'm really fascinated by, I'm not a member of the WGA. I don't write screenplays, but I'm very interested in the relationship of power between the writer and the producer,
Yeah.
which is really what's happening, is the like fight between the distributor and the writer, and like who gets paid, the distributor or the writer. And the argument of the writer is like, hey, let's both get paid. The argument of the
Right.
distributor is like,
Yeah.
let me pay you as little as I can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like everything else in the writing world, it's 10 years behind the music world. I mean,
Yeah.
we're looking at Spotify, right? So the people who are striking are like, we don't want this, we don't want Hollywood to become Spotify,
Yeah.
where the distributor makes all the money and the creators make none.
Pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's a very understandable ask, but history is not really showing that they are going to win necessarily. We'll find out, but there's
Yeah, they do have more leverage in that at the moment. It's not just the writers, but they have the support of the stars that actually make the streamers money.
right.
Um,
Until those stars sell their likeness and voice for AI
yeah, and
anyway.
until the strike goes so long that people get
Want
tired
to
of
get back
not
to work.
making money. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, I'm using a plotting tool that you had um, put up on your site ages ago.
Yeah.
Um, and I had downloaded it ages ago when you were talking about it. And it's got a place to do like a modified character wheel and whatever. But for every scene, it has a line that is, what emotion do you want your reader to feel in this scene?
Yeah.
And I I've been thinking that's our job as editors.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whether we're talking about story, there's a story structure exists for that result.
Yeah.
Character voice exists for that result.
Yep. Yeah.
Even grammar and punctuation exist for that result, because if you toss the reader out of the flow, then you're tossing them out of the emotion as well, right?
Yeah.
So, what emotion do you want your what theme or emotion or feeling do you want your book to move in a reader, and how do you want to do that in each and every scene?
Yeah.
And you know what, that should make a good book.
It's
But even if it doesn't, it should make the book that you want to make.
yeah,
And it may never be famous, it may never make any money, but
yeah. Well, it's a little like the question we're talking about, viable career. I think often we're asking the wrong question, right? Because the question of viable career is like, how can I make money doing this? And the problem with starting something with the assumption, with the question of how can I make money doing this, is that often the best way to make money is not like you're forcing two ideas together that don't necessarily go together, right? Like it is a little bit about like, what if a vampire bites a chair, right?
right.
Like, it's that like the question of like, I want to write a great book. How do I make money doing it? Those are two questions that you either want to make money, and there's 1,000 ways to make money, and very few of them are write one great book. And
Right.
then,
If
and then
that's the
there's,
outcome,
yeah,
you should
it,
not be writing
yeah,
books,
it's
if
like
that's
pick
what you're
one or the
after.
other,
Yeah.
because putting the weight of making this make money, and this is where I was going with like, I think we're moving to a new era. I think there's some questions, myths we used to say that are breaking down. One of the myths is the pairing of those two questions. Is like,
Yeah.
hey, are you writing a great book or are you making money? Because those are two different questions. Um,
Not to
And
say that you can't write a great book that then makes money, but
yeah, no, but
as a
you
means to an
can't.
end, it's not a
Yeah,
very
you
efficient
can't
way to
write a
make money.
great book with the idea that I'm writing this to make $1 million. Like that's not, there's 1,000 other ways to make $1 million that are much more successful than writing
Yeah.
a great book. It's the same with storytelling in that, like, I think a lot of times we talk about plot, we talk about characters, we talk about genre tropes. The question we're really asking is like, what is the, um, what is the, sorry, my children just came in and totally distracted me. The question is like, what is the emotional journey we're taking the reader on? Because that's the point of story, is like we tell stories to take people on an emotional journey. So let's just ask the question we need to be asking, which is,
Right.
how do we want them to feel at every point of this journey? Yeah.
Yeah. I
Instead
mean,
of
and you,
asking like, what are the tropes? What are the plots? What's the
right.
like, start with the question that you need to be starting with. How do I want them to feel at
Although
this
you
point?
also, I think you have to have end to what end,
Yeah.
which is where theme comes
Which
in.
is where
Because
theme
if
comes
I,
in.
which is where
Yeah.
if I just, and can be my problem with horror, right? Like if you want me to feel horrified, great,
Yeah.
but why?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Why?
Uh,
Why are you scaring the crap out of me?
right.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's fascinating. And those myths, like I've been selling books for a long time, and I will tell you that nobody is making money in the publishing industry.
Yeah.
They're not.
Yeah.
Only the distributor, which in this case is Amazon, right?
Yeah.
They're the ones making money. People who write bestsellers still have other jobs.
Mhm.
The number is very few. In fact, I would say at this point, the number of independent authors making a living is higher than the number of trad publishers making a living from writing. And
Yeah.
it's both of them are very, very small.
Yeah. It was interesting. I think these myths we believe only help the distributors. There's nothing, there's no downside to us to confronting, cultural myths we believe as writers and asking, is that true?
Mhm.
Um, because it helps us make more strategic decisions. And I think that's what's really
Yeah.
key for us, is making decisions about what we're doing and what we want. And who and like how we're gonna, because writing books, whether you are single and only responsible, like and a complete master of your own time, which I don't think anybody actually is. Like everybody owes time to
No,
somebody, but
because time is a bastard.
yeah, but if you are, let's just hypothetically say, even if you're single and a complete master of your own time, you still have to decide where to spend it, because it's the only resource that never replenishes. um to quote the Jewish Rabbi Heschel, time is the only resource that you can never earn back.
Yeah.
So it's that, like, you're still making decisions about where you spend this incredibly valuable commodity. So like, make them strategically with understanding what is the outcome here, like what's the preferred outcome. And I think I have a lot of respect for uh people in our community, in the dialoguer community, that are making the hard decisions and really coming to understand who they are as a writer. Like Alicia McCullough is like, this is the brand I want to do. I am not worried about writing the greatest novel of all time. I have a very specific brand, Badass Black Women, and I'm living in that brand 100%. That's a
Mhm.
very difficult decision for somebody to make, because it's very strategic. And
Yeah.
I have so much respect for her. Or JP Rindfleisch saying like, I am going to be local. I'm not going to try to franchise beyond my immediate area, and I'm going to focus on being the best author Rockford, Illinois has ever seen. Like that is a it is not a cop out decision. It is actually a very strategic and difficult decision to make, because you have to say no to 1,000 things.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think one of the myths that actually may be accurate, but people misinterpret is the 20 books to 50K.
mhm.
Because I see this before the rise of digital. I saw this with like authors like Lee Child, or authors like Louise Penny, where like they just kept doing a book, right?
Yeah,
They just kept doing a book,
kept doing the next
and
book. Yeah,
and and what's happening in the trad pub world is that, you know, they're not giving people the chance to do that anymore.
No,
I mean,
yeah,
like John Irving, who wrote like four of my favorite novels of all time, wrote four terrible ones first, but Random House like was like, this guy's a writer, we're going to keep publishing his stuff.
yeah, back to him.
And I was looking at because I was looking for comps for my book the other day, and like and covers, trying to match the genre cover. And Jenna DeLeon has terrible covers. If you're listening, I'm so sorry to tell you this, but they're terrible. But they are all the same.
Yeah,
She's written 25 books in the same series.
yeah,
That the 25 books is not what makes you the 50K.
no,
It's people reading the 25 books because you took them on a journey that they liked and they came
yeah.
back for another one.
It's building a
So
tribe. Yeah,
so when you think of 20 books to 50K, don't think, oh, how am I going to plot out these 20 books? Think about, how am I going to make book one? Because everything goes through book one, because you can't just throw up 20 books and make money. You have to also have your mailing list, which you only have people on because they read book one. So, you know, uh, but she's kept that brand. She's kept that character. Sheila, obviously, some people get tired of writing that character and want to switch, and that's fine. But um, book 25 is selling really, really well
yeah,
because she has kept to her brand and is delivering a experience that readers like.
yeah,
And I think the people who um, do that by strategizing what they think people like, are the people who get to like book four and they're like, oh, I'm doing a different scene, you know, screw
yeah,
that, whatever.
yeah.
Um,
Which is me. I've done that
yeah,
so many times.
which is me. Also, I mean, and some people just, that's the temperament, right? I'm the
Yeah.
same way. I don't want to write 20 of the same book,
It
but
took me 12 books to figure out I need to write one-offs. It took me 12 books to figure it out. I
yeah,
write
it's
one-off books. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Anyway.
right. So, I mean, someone getting tired of a series is fine, but my point is, just writing the 20 books doesn't get you the 50K.
No, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Got to
yeah.
find the people who like your brand, and
Yeah.
if you don't have a brand, they can't like your brand.
Yeah. Totally. All right, anything else you want to talk about?
No, we've
It's
been
been
on
fun.
here for 8 hours and you've cut it down to
I
90
know.
minutes.
Let's
So
cut it down to 9 minutes.
uh,
We're doing good.
it is always a pleasure.
Yeah, this is why I love time with Tom, because I know
Yeah,
you and I could just like talk for like, we could literally sit here for the next 10 hours and just talk about things. So it's great.
yeah.
Yeah.
Fourth Tower of Inverness. I can't.
Yeah. I'm
I
totally gonna
can't.
go check it out.
I can't recommend. I would listen to no more than 20 minutes,
Okay.
and you'll get, like, especially skip past like the first 3 minutes. They're introducing all the characters, which is a terrible idea.
That's for sure.
Um, but man, it really does some amazing stuff, and it does some terrible
Nice.
stuff. But yeah, think of your story as a radio show, and could you do it?
I love it. I think that's great. All right, thanks, man. I'm gonna
All
hit
right,
stop and we can talk a
talk to
little
you next
bit
time.
more.